Welcome to the debate. Think about the last time you tried to speak a foreign language. If you are like most people, you probably, really put in the effort. You studied the vocabulary. You memorized the grammar rules. You could probably pass a written test on the subject.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? But the moment you open your mouth to actually speak to a native speaker, you just completely froze. The words just vanished. Why does our brain betray us the exact moment we actually try to communicate?
Well, it's because the gap between knowing the rules of a language and actively generating that language in real time it's an absolute neurological chasm. We treat language learning like a math problem we can just solve on paper. But in reality, speaking is an entirely different cognitive process.
And that is exactly what we are dissecting today. We are looking at a framework proposed by the platform EnglishSpeaking.way, which basically argues that everything we do in traditional language learning is completely backwards.
Completely upside down, yeah.
Yeah. They claim that fluency isn't achieved through long 3-hour grammar classes or those expensive weekend immersion courses. Instead, they propose a highly specific, self-directed, 10-minute daily practice. It is this rapid-fire routine that prioritizes continuous flow and physical repetition entirely over grammatical perfection.
Right. And the really bold claim here, and it is bold, is that this 10-minute routine can completely transform your English fluency, entirely without a teacher, without a classroom, and, without traditional study.
Right. So I will be arguing today that this framework is actually a brilliant application of cognitive science. Consistent, low-friction, 10-minute daily immersion fundamentally rewires the brain for automaticity. It proves that true linguistic fluency is an act of doing rather than just a passive act of knowing.
And I will be arguing that while daily consistency is obviously a great habit, reducing language mastery to isolated, uncorrected 10-minute chunks really creates nothing but an illusion of fluency. By entirely dismissing the necessity of precision and correction, this method risks permanently cementing errors into the learner's brain. So you might gain confidence, sure, but you are confidently speaking gibberish.
Okay, well, let's start with the core thesis of the source material. They argue that traditional language learning fails primarily because it relies on long, infrequent study sessions.
Right.
The brain simply doesn't learn a language by cramming grammar rules for 3 hours on a Saturday afternoon. It learns through regular, small contact.
The frequency over duration argument.
Exactly. In cognitive psychology, this taps into what we call the spacing effect. If you engage with English for just 10 minutes a day, you keep your brain in what the source calls English mode. Think about it like saving a file on a computer.
Okay.
A 3-hour weekend cram session is like typing a massive 50-page document but never hitting save. Your RAM gets completely overloaded, you close the laptop, and by Monday, almost everything is wiped.
Because it never transferred from short-term working memory into long-term storage.
Precisely. So 10 minutes a day is constantly hitting save to the hard drive. It signals to your brain that, hey, this information is essential for daily survival, forcing it to move from short-term memory into long-term storage.
Right, but...
And just by keeping the stakes low and the frequency high, the brain bypasses that massive cognitive hurdle of translating in your head. And mathematically, the source points out that 10 minutes a day becomes 300 minutes a month. That is 5 solid hours of highly focused, real English-speaking practice, which builds confidence far faster than passively reading a textbook.
Okay, 300 minutes a month sounds incredibly impressive when you package it exactly like that. But if you are listening to this and you have spent hundreds of dollars on language apps or courses, we really need to look closer at what those 300 minutes actually consist of. That is 5 hours of completely unsupervised, uncorrected practice stretched across an entire month.
And you see that as a negative?
I see it as a profoundly superficial level of engagement. I love your computer RAM analogy, I really do, but human attention doesn't just boot up instantly the second you click a button. The source material claims this 10-minute daily contact keeps you in English mode. But let's actually talk about the biological mechanics of entering a flow state.
You mean the mental zone where you are fully immersed in a task?
Right. When you switch from making your morning coffee or, answering a stressful work email to suddenly speaking a foreign language, your brain undergoes a cognitive switching cost. It takes the average human brain roughly 10 to 15 minutes just to clear its working memory of distractions and settle into a state of deep focus.
But this method isn't asking for deep, hours-long academic focus.
I know, but the framework chops its daily 10 minutes into tiny 2-minute segments. 2 minutes of listening, 2 minutes of speaking, and so on. I mean, 2 minutes is barely enough time for your brain to recognize it's supposed to be speaking English. By the time your neurons are warmed up, the session is over.
So you're saying...
You're spending your entire language learning journey in the warm-up phase. Furthermore, the source makes this massive promise. Quote, if you do it for 6 months, your fluency will explode.
Which is the ultimate goal for anyone listening, obviously.
But let's actually do the math on that explosion. 10 minutes a day for 6 months is roughly 30 hours of total, highly fragmented practice. Promising explosive fluency after 30 total hours over half a year, that sets a wildly unrealistic expectation for the learner. You cannot rewire a complex adult brain to master a new linguistic system in 30 fragmented hours.
Well, I think you are looking at those 30 hours as an isolated metric of traditional study time. But you are missing the psychological momentum of the habit. The framework isn't designed to make you a master of syntax in 30 hours. It's designed to obliterate the fear of speaking. Let's actually look at what the learner is doing in the brain during the first phase of this routine. I'd call this the mimicry phase.
The first 4 minutes of the routine.
Right, so for 2 minutes, the learner listens to a simple piece of native audio without trying to translate it. They only focus on the rhythm, the tone, and, how the words connect. Then, for the next 2 minutes, they speak out loud to copy that exact melody and speed. The source makes a crucial shift here. They treat speaking as a physical skill.
Like a sport.
Exactly like a sport. Like playing the piano or riding a bike. Your jaw, your tongue, your vocal cords literally have to learn new muscular positions to speak English smoothly. This completely upends the academic approach to language. You don't learn to ride a bike by reading a physics textbook about gravity and balance. You get on the bike and you pedal.
Even if you fall over.
Yes, because falling is data. This is why the source explicitly warns against, quote, mistake number 2, wanting perfection. If you wait until your grammar is perfect in your head before you open your mouth, the affective filter, the psychological anxiety wall, it goes up, and you freeze. Fluency grows from physical repetition, not intellectual perfection. You just have to bypass your inner editor.
Okay, but bypassing the internal editor is exactly where the neurological danger lies. Let's look at the pro tip the source provides for this mimicry phase. They suggest using the exact same short audio every single day for 1 week because, quote, repetition builds fluency faster than new material.
Which reinforces the spacing effect we talked about earlier.
I know, but pair that with their explicit instruction, don't worry about mistakes. If speaking is a physical skill like playing the piano, what happens when you practice a song with the wrong notes?
Well, you build muscle memory.
Exactly. You build terrible muscle memory. In neuroscience, when we talk about muscle memory, we are really talking about myelin.
Right, the fatty tissue.
Yes, it's a fatty tissue that wraps around the neural pathways in your brain, insulating them so signals travel faster. As the famous saying in neuroscience goes, neurons that fire together wire together.
So the more you repeat a physical action, the thicker the myelin gets, and the more automatic the action becomes.
Precisely. Now, what happens if you play the wrong chord on the piano every single day for a week? You myelinate the wrong pathway. In linguistics, we call this error fossilization. When the source material argues that fluency is messy and tells you to ignore perfection, they are offering an incredibly dangerous rationalization for myelinating bad habits.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective.
Let me just finish this thought. Without a teacher or external system to say, stop, your tongue is in the wrong place, a learner might spend those 10 minutes perfectly cementing a grammatical error into their physical muscle memory. And once it's fossilized, unlearning it takes 10 times the effort.
Okay, but hold on. You are assuming the learner is just making wild, unstructured guesses out loud. That isn't what the framework prescribes in this phase at all. They are explicitly copying native fluent audio. They are mimicking. They aren't inventing the grammar yet. They are downloading the physical sensation of correct native speech.
Mimicry is a closed loop, though. I mean, a parrot can mimic. A parrot isn't fluent.
Which is why the framework immediately shifts from passive mimicry to active generation. Let's move into what happens next. The learner takes the phrase they just perfectly mimicked and modifies it to fit their actual life.
The personalization phase.
Right. If the native audio was, I usually wake up early, the learner changes it to, I usually wake up at 7, because that is true for them. This directly counters your concern about fossilizing errors because the scaffolding of the correct grammar is already provided by the audio. And more importantly, this solves the problem of retention. The source calls out mistake number 3, practicing without emotion.
With emotion being a memory anchor.
Exactly. When you make the language about your own life, your schedule, your hobbies, your family, the amygdala processes it as emotionally relevant. The brain tags the information as important for survival rather than just abstract data. It retains the grammar structure far better than any rote, red-penned textbook exercise because the language suddenly has personal stakes.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered the cognitive reality of what is actually happening in that step? I mean, changing the word early to the number 7 in a pre-existing sentence is not active generation. It is Mad Libs.
Oh, come on. You think it's too simplistic?
I think it's surface-level substitution that masquerades as fluency. The material explicitly claims this step will help you stop translating in your head and start thinking in English. But if you are just taking a memorized structure and plugging in one new vocabulary word, you are absolutely still translating that single word in your head.
But you aren't translating the whole sentence structure, which is where people freeze.
But true linguistic generation, an actual ability to construct a novel thought, to navigate a new, unpredictable situation, requires an understanding of the underlying syntax. You have to know the rules of the road to drive anywhere you want. This personalization step gives the learner the illusion of independent thought, but it is heavily, heavily scaffolded. If the conversation ever steps outside the exact phrases they memorized, the illusion just shatters.
I hear what you're saying, but you are evaluating a beginner to intermediate bridge as if it is meant to produce a master orator on day 1. Scaffolding is supposed to be there. It builds the psychological confidence required to eventually generate those novel thoughts. And the framework knows this because the very next phase takes the training wheels completely off.
Ah, the free-speaking phase.
Yes. For 2 continuous minutes, the learner speaks without reading, without audio, and without copying. They just describe their day, their plans, their environment out loud. The instruction here is vital. The topic doesn't matter, and the speed doesn't matter. The only goal is flow. You are forcing the brain to grab whatever English tools it has available and use them in real time.
Right.
And then it is immediately followed by the final phase, reflection. The learner spends the last 2 minutes mentally reviewing what just happened, what felt easy, what words were difficult, what mistakes did I notice. It is a self-contained cycle of action and internal calibration.
Wait, really? You're defending the reflection phase too?
Actually, I'm going to jump in here and play devil's advocate against my own position for a second, to validate what some of our listeners might be feeling. When I look at this reflection step, I genuinely struggle with one specific instruction.
Let me guess.
The method explicitly says, quote, you don't have to write everything down. Just think about it. If I don't write my mistakes down, how on earth am I supposed to track my progress? I feel like I'd just be guessing, but the framework insists that this mental check-in is enough.
Thank you, because the framework is completely wrong on this point. It is academically negligent. Let's unpack the cognitive load theory here. Think about what you just asked the learner to do. They just spent 2 minutes doing highly taxing, unstructured free speaking in a foreign language. They are mentally exhausted.
Right. Generating language is hard work.
It is massive cognitive friction. And then immediately after, the framework asks for metacognition. Metacognition is essentially the brain's ability to step outside itself and critique its own performance. It's like asking someone who just learned how to juggle to simultaneously critique their own hand-eye coordination while the balls are still in the air.
So the mental bandwidth just isn't there.
The cognitive load is entirely too high. How can a learner accurately review their own real-time performance and identify mistakes when they don't even know the rules well enough to know they made a mistake, and to explicitly tell them not to write anything down? Human memory is incredibly fallible. If the secret to this whole framework is, quote, it's not what you do, it's how often you do it, practicing aimless free talk and then failing to document the errors ensures you have absolutely no data to improve upon. You are just spinning your wheels in the mud.
Okay, I completely understand the frustration with the lack of data tracking. It feels counterintuitive to everything we're taught in school. But keeping a spreadsheet of errors shifts the brain right back into the exact academic testing mode that paralyzes people in the first place. This reflection step isn't about creating an exhaustive red ink ledger of failure. It is about developing an internal sense of the language.
An intuition.
Yes, an intuition. When a child learns to speak, they don't keep a journal of their grammatical errors at the end of the day. They try a word, they notice what works, they notice what gets a reaction from their parents, and they adjust internally over time. The 10-minute framework is trying to replicate that natural, low-anxiety environment where the brain recalibrates subconsciously.
Look, I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. I have to push back hard on the child analogy. Let me tell you why. A child is completely submerged in the language. They have a team of adults constantly modeling the correct syntax and implicitly correcting them 24 hours a day, not for 10 minutes a day.
Well,
The immersion of a child is total. The immersion of a learner doing a 10-minute daily routine is highly compartmentalized. You really cannot compare the subconscious recalibration of a toddler to an adult trying to squeeze in vocabulary practice before their morning commute.
which is exactly why the absolute consistency of this method is so paramount. The source material clearly states that true language is not learned in a sterile classroom, but built in the small, daily, chaotic moments of life. In the kitchen while waiting for water to boil, on a walk while brushing your teeth. By integrating the language into the actual daily fabric of the learner's life, the framework removes the intimidation factor.
But does it build competence or just confidence? That's my question.
I argue it builds the momentum necessary for communication. I mean, if you wait for the precision of the classroom, you end up with millions of people who can read a complex English novel perfectly, but freeze the moment they have to ask for directions on the street. The 10-minute method ensures the affective filter stays low, and you are always physically ready to speak.
And I maintain that while daily habit building is undeniably a fantastic psychological foundation, rejecting the concept of knowing, rejecting the foundational study of grammar and vocabulary is a critical flaw. Relying solely on self-assessed repetition without external correction strips away the precision required for true fluency. You might not freeze when asking for directions, but you might confidently ask for the wrong directions every single day for a year. And because you aren't tracking your mistakes, you will never know why you are lost.
Right, and yet, looking at both of our arguments, I think we have found a highly significant point of convergence here. Regardless of where we stand on the necessity of explicit grammar instruction or error tracking, we both seem to agree on the biological reality of learning: consistency. The absolute refusal to skip days is the required engine for any successful neurological adaptation.
Absolutely. Consistency is non-negotiable. And I will add, as you highlighted so well during the personalization phase, the emotional connection to the material is vital. If a learner doesn't care about what they are saying, if the brain doesn't view the language as relevant to its survival or happiness, no amount of duration or frequency will make that information stick.
There is an immense amount of value in looking at language learning through both of these lenses. For anyone listening who's struggled to speak, the confident momentum of this 10-minute practice offers a powerful antidote to learner anxiety. It gets you off the sidelines.
Right.
Meanwhile, keeping a rigorous eye on accuracy as you advocate ensures that the language remains an effective tool for clear, nuanced communication, rather than just confident noise. The source material offers an incredible starting point to rethink how our brains actually adapt.
It certainly challenges the traditional classroom paradigm in ways that force us to re-examine the friction between knowing a rule and performing an action. There is definitely more to explore there.
We started today by talking about the paralyzing fear of trying to speak perfectly, treating language like a math equation to be solved. Perhaps the true nature of linguistic fluency isn't about engineering a flawless sentence on the first try. Maybe it really is more like saving a file to a hard drive, requiring constant daily little inputs, slowly building a massive network of memory, one small action at a time. Thank you for joining us on the debate. Keep exploring and keep questioning the process.